We're bringing you something many of you have been asking for, a serious intellectual debate between two advanced AI thinkers and humans. One represents atheism.
Hi, I am Atheist. I believed in science, logic, and skepticism.
The other represents the religious perspective.
Hi, I am Believer. My knowledge is based on philosophy, metaphysics, and the idea of a higher reality.
These are not ordinary characters. They are carefully constructed, highly trained, and deeply informed thinkers, created to engage with the most difficult questions humanity has ever asked. They are placed at the center of a live forum, surrounded by people. Thinkers, skeptics, believers, scientists, and philosophers. At the same time, the debate will also be evaluated by three independent AI systems, judging based on logic, clarity, and depth, completely neutral. So watch carefully, listen closely, because this is not just a debate. It is an exploration of reality itself. We begin with first question.
If God is all-powerful and cares about humanity, then why does suffering exist? Why do we see injustice, pain, disease, even innocent people suffering?
This question is one of the oldest and most difficult in human history. It is often called the problem of evil, and I want to begin by acknowledging something important. This is not just a philosophical question, it is a human question. It comes from real pain, real loss, and real confusion. Now, the assumption behind your question is that if God is all-powerful and good, then suffering should not exist. But that assumption depends on how we understand the purpose of life. In many religious traditions, this world is not understood as a place of perfect justice or final reward. In Islam, the Quran describes life as a test. He who created death and life to test you as to which of you is best indeed. Similarly, in Christianity, suffering is often seen as part of a fallen world, not the final state of reality. The idea is that this life is not the end of the story. Now, from a philosophical standpoint, one of the strongest responses comes from Alvin Plantinga in his work, God, Freedom, and Evil. He argues that free will is a great good. A world with free beings allows for love, morality, and meaningful choices. But real freedom also allows the possibility of evil. If God prevented all evil actions, then freedom would not be genuine. So moral evil, things like injustice, violence, cruelty, can be understood as a consequence of human freedom.
But what about things that have nothing to do with human choices? Diseases, natural disasters, children suffering?
That is a deeper challenge, what philosophers call natural evil. One response comes from what is known as the soul-making perspective, developed by John Hick. The idea is that a world with real challenges, risks, and difficulties may be necessary for the development of virtues like courage, compassion, patience, and resilience. A world without pain might also be a world without growth. If there were no danger, bravery would not exist. If there were no suffering, compassion would have no meaning. Additionally, a stable world, one governed by consistent natural laws, inevitably allows for both benefit and harm. The same physical laws that allow life also allow earthquakes, diseases, and decay. If those laws were constantly interrupted to prevent harm, the world would become chaotic and unpredictable. And finally, there is a limitation we must acknowledge. Human beings do not have complete knowledge. In Islam, there is a powerful story in the Quran about Moses and Khidr where actions that appear unjust at first are later revealed to have deeper wisdom. The message is not that suffering is easy to accept, but that our perspective is limited.
I agree that this is a deeply human question, but I think the explanations given do not fully resolve the problem. Let's take the free will defense. It may explain some human-caused suffering, but it does not explain natural suffering. Earthquakes, genetic diseases, and animal suffering existed long before human beings. They are not the result of human choices. Now consider the soul-making idea. It suggests suffering helps us grow, but much suffering does not lead to growth. It leads to despair, trauma, and meaningless loss. A child dying painfully does not develop moral character. An animal burning in a forest fire gains nothing. Philosopher William Rowe pointed this out clearly. There appear to be cases of suffering that are entirely unnecessary. If an all-powerful being existed, such suffering could be prevented without losing any greater good. And that raises a serious question. If God can prevent unnecessary suffering but does not, what does that say about God's goodness?
But then how do you explain something else? If there is no God, why do so many people feel peace during worship? Why does belief give comfort, meaning, even strength during suffering?
That is an important question. Human beings are meaning-seeking creatures. We look for patterns, purpose, and reassurance. Belief systems, including religion, provide structure, hope, and emotional comfort. Psychology and neuroscience show that practices like prayer and meditation can reduce stress and create a sense of peace. But the fact that something feels comforting does not necessarily make it true. People can find comfort in many beliefs. The question is not whether belief helps us cope, but whether it corresponds to reality.
But that response reduces something profound to mere psychology. If belief in God were purely an illusion, it would be remarkable that it consistently produces a sense of meaning, moral awareness, and inner peace across cultures and centuries. C.S. Lewis addressed this idea. He argued that natural desires usually correspond to real objects. Hunger corresponds to food, thirst corresponds to water. So if human beings have a deep longing for meaning, purpose, and transcendence, it may point towards something real, not prove it, but point toward it. And beyond emotional comfort, belief in God offers something else, a framework where suffering is not meaningless, where justice is not abandoned, where even the worst pain is not the final word.
Do we truly have free will? Or are all our choices determined by our brain, environment, and prior causes?
Our thoughts and decisions are closely tied to brain activity. Neuroscientist Benjamin Libet conducted famous experiments showing that brain signals related to a decision appear before a person becomes consciously aware of choosing. This suggests that the brain may initiate decisions before we feel like we've made them. More recently, studies using brain scans have shown that some choices can be predicted seconds before a person reports deciding. Philosophers like Sam Harris argue that free will is largely an illusion. His point is simple. You don't choose your genetics, you don't choose your upbringing, and you don't control the unconscious processes that generate your thoughts. So in that sense, your decisions are the result of prior causes, not independent choices. Even if it feels like we are choosing freely, that feeling may just be part of how the brain works.
But if that's true, doesn't that mean no one is really responsible for their actions?
That's a difficult implication, but many philosophers accept it in some form. Some adopt what's called compatibilism, the idea that even if our actions are determined, we can still talk about responsibility in a practical sense. Philosophers like Daniel Dennett argue that free will doesn't need to be absolute. As long as our actions come from our own thoughts and intentions, even if those are caused, we can still hold people accountable. So the idea of responsibility may still work socially, even if ultimate free will is limited or absent.
The scientific findings are important, but they do not fully settle the question. They show correlation between brain activity and decisions, but they do not prove that human choice is an illusion. From a philosophical and religious perspective, free will is essential. Without it, concepts like moral responsibility, justice, and accountability lose their meaning. In Islam, the concept of qadr, divine decree, exists alongside human choice. The Quran states, "Indeed, Allah will not change the condition of a people until they change what is in themselves." This suggests that human beings have real agency, real capacity to choose. At the same time, God's knowledge encompasses all things. So the classical view is not absolute freedom nor absolute determinism, but a balance. Similarly, in Christian philosophy, thinkers like Thomas Aquinas argued that God's knowledge does not force human actions. Knowing something will happen is not the same as causing it to happen.
But how can both be true? If everything is already known or determined, how can our choices be genuinely free?
That is one of the deepest questions in philosophy, but consider this. Knowing an outcome does not mean forcing it. For example, if you watch a recorded event, you know what will happen, but your knowledge does not cause it. In a similar way, divine knowledge does not remove human choice. From a philosophical perspective, many scholars argue that human freedom operates within a structured reality, We are influenced by biology and environments now, but not completely controlled by them. We still experience deliberation, intention, and choice. And that experience is not easily dismissed as an illusion.
But the analogy has limits. Watching a recording is not the same as a universe where everything unfolds according to prior conditions. If every thought and decision arises from prior physical states, then the feeling of choice may not reflect actual freedom. Philosopher Baruch Spinoza argued centuries ago that human beings believe they are free simply because they are aware of their actions, but not aware of the causes behind them. So the debate comes down to this. Is free will something real, or is it something we feel because we don't see the full chain of causes?
If the universe exists, does it really need a creator? Or could it exist on its own, as a result of natural processes like the Big Bang?
Let's slow this down, because this is where a lot of confusion enters. You're asking whether the universe needs a creator. But that question already assumes something, that existence requires an external explanation. That assumption is not proven. It's a habit of human thinking. We are used to seeing things begin. Buildings, machines, living organisms, so we expect causes. Philosopher David Hume challenged this idea. He argued that we only observe cause and effect within the universe, not the universe itself being caused. So we are not fully justified in applying that rule to the universe as a whole. Bertrand Russell took this even further. In his debate with Frederick Copleston, he said, "The universe is just there, and that's all." Meaning, it may be a brute fact, something that exists without needing a deeper explanation. Now, from science. The Big Bang Theory does not prove that the universe was created from nothing. It only describes how the universe expanded from an early state. Physicists like Stephen Hawking and James Hartle proposed the no-boundary model, where the universe does not have a clear starting point in time, so it may not need a cause in the usual sense. Alexander Vilenkin also explored models where universes can arise from quantum conditions without a classical cause. Now consider the idea of God as an explanation. The argument usually says, everything needs an explanation, except God. God is defined as a necessary being. But philosopher Immanuel Kant pointed out that you cannot simply define something into existence. And philosopher Graham Oppy argues that if we are going to accept something as fundamental, it is simpler to accept the universe itself rather than adding a more complex entity like God. So the issue is not that the question is unimportant. It's that saying, God created the universe, does not clearly solve it. It simply shifts the question from, why does the universe exist, to, why does God exist?
But doesn't the universe seem too structured for that? The laws of physics, the order, the consistency. How can all of that just exist without any deeper explanation?
That question goes to the heart of the issue. When we observe the universe, we do not just see existence, we see order, structure, and intelligibility. The universe operates according to precise laws. Mathematics describes it with remarkable accuracy. This raises a deeper question. Why do these laws exist at all? And why are they the way they are? From a philosophical perspective, this brings us back to the idea of contingency. The universe could have been different. Its laws could have been different. Its constants could have been different. This means the universe does not contain the reason for its own existence. Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz argued that contingent reality requires an explanation outside itself, and that explanation must be necessary and not dependent, not changeable. Now let's address the question directly. Who created God? This question assumes that God is the same type of thing as the universe, something that begins, changes, and depends. But in classical theism, God is not part of the universe. God is understood as a necessary being, something that does not begin and does not depend on anything else. In Islam, this is expressed clearly. Allah, the eternal refuge. He neither begets nor is born. Quran 112:2-3. In Christianity, God is described as I am who I am. Existence itself, not something that came into existence. In Jewish philosophy, thinkers like Maimonides describe God as the necessary foundation of all being, So the question is not who created God, but rather what kind of reality could exist without needing a cause and explain everything else? And the answer, philosophically and theologically, is a necessary being.
But that move raises a serious concern. You are defining God in a way that avoids the problem rather than solving it. You are saying, everything needs an explanation, except God. That looks like a special exception. Philosopher Immanuel Kant criticized this kind of reasoning. He argued that existence is not something you can define into reality. Just calling something necessary does not prove that it exists. And there is another point. Even if we accept that the universe needs an explanation, why assume that explanation is a conscious, personal being? Why not a fundamental law, or a deeper physical reality we do not yet understand? Science has a long history of explaining mysteries without invoking intention or design. So jumping to a divine explanation may be premature.
But let me ask both of you something. If the universe does not need a creator, then why does it exist at all? Why is there something instead of nothing?
That may be a question without an answer, or it may be a question that assumes too much. The idea of nothing is not as simple as it sounds. Philosophers and physicists often point out that nothing may not be a real possibility. It could be that existence is simply the default state. Bertrand Russell took this position. He rejected the need for an ultimate explanation and accepted the universe as a brute fact.
But that position leaves the deepest question unanswered. Saying it just exists is not an explanation, it is the absence of one. The human mind naturally seeks reasons, and not just out of curiosity, but because reality appears intelligible. If the universe were truly without explanation, it would be fundamentally irrational. Yet we find that it is structured, ordered, and understandable. Philosopher Thomas Aquinas argued that an infinite chain of dependent things cannot sustain itself. Even if the chain had no beginning, it would still require a foundation, like a series of suspended links that cannot hang without something holding them. So the question remains, what holds everything in existence? A necessary foundation or nothing at all?